So here's my process. It does not have to be your process, but after all, you signed up for my class, so here we go. But the principles behind this process are what's important. So we have our construction drawing, emphasizes the simple relationships of the smaller parts, how they fit within the whole, and the three-dimensional geometric nature of the subject to bring a sense of three-dimensionality on a two-dimensional page. And then I like to, from my approach, hit some of the dark so that I don't lose my drawing as I push and pull. This is not a necessary step. With a different technique, you might not need to do this, but you've seen how I really work over my drawing, pushing and pulling and molding forms. And so I hit these darks in key spots to help me to not lose the drawing as I move forward. Every one of these strokes is in the shadow. I don't put them in the direct light because it would be too much of a fuss to have to go back in and erase these dark strokes out of the light. Okay, so I hit that. Now I come in and identify what's in direct light and what's in shadow. And as I lay in that shadow, I give consideration to how those shadow shapes wrap around the form, wrap around the form, wrap around the form, wrap around the form, curve around the form. Okay, so I'm getting big massive light and shadow, and I'm thinking still about 3D and geometry. Now I start sculpting form. Pushing and pulling, you've seen my technique. Trying to sculpt how those forms wrap around from light into halftone into shadow. And then I come back in with pencil, with my kneaded eraser, as you've seen me do, pick out some of the crisp edges, pick out some of the details, use my kneaded eraser to pick out some of the highlights, do some fine tuning, a little work in the hair, and voila, we have a finished drawing. And I hope I've made it look simple. It's not easy, but it is simple, at least in the approach and in the thinking. It's simple, but not if you go on autopilot and start doing the things that I've begged you not to do in the class, to render pieces and parts individually. It may end up very rugged. You're doing an old man, and people may think that you were caricaturing, but as I've said before, if it looks like a caricature but you didn't mean for that to happen, I'm sorry, my friends. It is not art. Sorry to be hard with you, but when something happens on accident without artistic intent, I'm sorry. You are the captain of the ship. You've got to make the decision. You've got to be in control. A caricature happens when you design it. We have got to be in control at all times of this simple, clear statement of our subject. So we are always looking for this. Where instead of seeing, well, there's an individual highlight here in the hair, there's a thing here, there's a thing here, there's a thing here, and kind of letting them get patchy and all over the place, we have to notice that they're all part of the same form. So these big masses that geometrically describe form, we have got to lay that in. We've got to lay it in such a way that we could hand off our drawings to a sculptor and they could create that image without having any other reference other than our drawings. That is what we've got to do to have clarity and artistry on that two-dimensional page. So I want to tell you about this image. And you might look at it and say, oh wow, is it, it's great, is it finished or is it more of a study? Well, here's the answer to that question. This is a drawing I did many years ago, and at the time it was kind of a breakthrough for me. Here's why. It was a tough subject. It was like, in a sense, like the image that we started out with, the demo that I just showed you, because with the guy's white shirt and with his white hair, it needed that same consideration of value structure that we've just started with. And so I thought to myself, well, gosh, this is a tough subject. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to mass in the values. The way I'll deal with this is I'm just going to mass in the values just with broad strokes, make sure all of the large forms turn, and get my edges right, get my sense of hard and soft edges, and that'll get me 50% of the way, and then I'll go in and I'll detail it out and finish it off, the other 50%. So I did exactly that. I treated it that way. Stepped back, looked at it, and said, oh my gosh, I'm not 50% done. I'm 90% done. And that was a huge lesson and a breakthrough of what it really is that makes the guts of these drawings. And so I was so tickled and excited about coming to that understanding. I've never touched it since. I'm kind of calling it done. It probably deserves some detail work. You probably want some detail and a little bit more character brought into that face, and maybe someday I'll go back in and see if I can do a little bit more with it. But that's the point that I want to make with it here. That simple value statement, simple turning forms, and simple edge control, which I promise we're leading up to the discussion of edges, that literally gets you 90% of the way in really getting a sense of life into these portraits of yours. And so that's something that in the last couple of years, something I've really been pushing. How much information can I leave out of my subject and still have what I hope and feel is an effective portrait? So here's one of the recent ones where I've pushed that as far as I could. I hope you like it. Hope you like it even better when we zoom out and see that what we were just looking at was that eye. Now, if you don't mind me saying so, I think that this face reads pretty well. Even when we zoom in on it, I think it reads pretty well. And to get that eye as part of that expression, how much did it take? That is it. That is this eye. That's all. And I believe that for this particular case, it was enough because of the massing and grouping and shadow. Because this portrait is more about the composition of the masses of light and shadow and the subtle nuances of that expression rather than the crisp, high-definition details. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with putting high definition in your face. Depending on your portrait, depending on the lighting, depending on the client, depending on the scenario. But even if you do put in more, it still has to fit within a simple value structure. So this is an image that I really had a good time with because I was fascinated by the shape and translucency of the hair as that bright light filtered through it, the luminosity that happened with that very bright light, how the hair reflected it, how it absorbed it, and how it transmitted it, and that little bit of light coming across the face. Now, once again, friends and family look at this study and they say, oh, wow, that's great, Nathan. Is it finished? And the answer is yes, it is finished. And here's why it's finished. Because my day job is in animation. That pays the bills. And so I get to do whatever I want in my free time, whether it pleases somebody else or not. By gosh. And so what I was interested in here was exactly what I just said. I was interested in the hard and soft edges, the lights and shadows and translucency created by the light falling through that hair and across the form. However, this image is equally simple with this one. It didn't take me longer, and it has just as simple a statement. But in this case, this one is about the smoldering expression, the nuance of the features. And so this one is, in fact, about that. And so no one has looked at this one and said, well, that's great, Nathan, is it finished? Because people tend to key in on, obviously we know this, people tend to key in on the features and the nuances of expression and so forth. And so that is, in fact, what this image is about, where this one was about something a little bit different.